Order. We start with questions to Secretary of State for Scotland, Joe Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number one, please.
Mr. Speaker, this is the first opportunity I've had to apologise to the House for using an inaccurate figure on previous occasions. I had told the House previously that the Scottish Government had received a record settlement of £47.7 billion this year, but Treasury figures show, Mr. Speaker, that the block grant for this year is actually £50 billion. That's the highest ever settlement in the history of devolution. With bells on, that's £50 billion, Mr. Speaker. No more money for schools, hospitals, policing and housing, an end to austerity. That's the Barnett formula in action. That's the Barnett formula that both the SNP and Reform have announced this week they want to scrap. Mr. Speaker, oil and gas will remain a crucial component of our energy mix for decades to come. Our workforce is the most talented in the world, and we are committed to ensuring their future. We have consulted on the support for the energy transition in the North Sea, including on these issues, and the Secretary of State, Desnes, will respond to that shortly. Economic growth in the UK for the first quarter be all forecasts to be 0.7%, the highest in the G7. Growth in Scotland is more sluggish than the rest of the UK, and if Scotland's economy had grown at the same rate as even the low Tory growth, it would be £10 billion larger, which makes it even more astonishing that the parties opposite oppose the EU, US and India trade deals.
Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ministers across various government departments have repeatedly said that oil and gas is here to stay for many years. Now, issuing new North Sea oil and gas licences would support tens of thousands of jobs, return millions in tax revenues to the Treasury and help grow the Scottish economy. So why is the government refusing to issue any new licences?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, there's an ongoing consultation that's concluded with regards to Rosebank and Jackdaw. That will be reported on by the Secretary of State Desnes in due course. And of course we have that North Sea transition consultation which has concluded, which I mentioned in my opening remarks. That takes into account all of those issues and will be published in due course.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour's windfall tax on energy profits in from the North Sea is designed to make us less reliant on people like Vladimir Putin. When I was campaigning in Hamilton last week, voters were asking me why the SNP, Tories and Reform were so against our windfall tax. I couldn't explain. Can the Secretary of State?
Well, I'm grateful for the question, because what astonishes me more than anything else is the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland was the Energy Minister when the EPL was brought in. He shakes his head, but he was the Energy Minister. Indeed, the leader of the SNP in this place, you may remember, didn't support it, supported it, didn't support it, then had it in their manifesto to extend it to every single Scottish industry. So I'm as at a loss as you are.
We now come to Andrew Bowies, Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by congratulating the famous Aberdeen Football Club, the only team in red I like to see winning, manager Jimmy Tulane, the players and all the coaching staff for winning their 8th Scottish Cup a week and a half ago, qualifying for the Europa League in the process. The pride and jubilation on the streets of Aberdeen last Sunday just shows how much the club means to the north east of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, even more important than Aberdeen Football Club to the north east is the oil and gas industry. Can I ask what the Secretary of State makes of the report published by Robert Gordon's University this week that warns of 400 job losses every 2 weeks in the North Sea?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I join the Shadow Secretary of State in congratulating through gritty teeth Aberdeen and winning the Scottish Cup? As a big Hearts fan, it's always nice to see the smaller clubs doing well in the national competitions. I don't know if I've lost the House or won the House there, Mr. Speaker, but we can see. Look, Mr. Speaker, we have this discussion across this dispatch box a lot during questions. Clean energy by 2030, setting up GB Energy in Aberdeen, something that he voted against, of course, is to make sure that we have that just transition. We do have a declining and mature base, and we need to make sure we create the jobs of the future in the future industries that are there for all to see in Scotland. He should support that rather than voting against it. And the EPL was brought in by his government.
To be absolutely clear, there is no transition. It isn't the Conservative Party saying this, it's the Robert Gordon University Energy Transition Institute. These mythical jobs in renewable energy simply don't exist yet. There is a slowdown in offshore wind deployment and a steep decline in offshore oil and gas activity as a direct result of Labour's ideological policies. 400 job losses every 2 weeks, a steep decline in skilled roles, nowhere for supply chain jobs to go but overseas, a decline in the workforce of 25%. And why? Because of massive investor uncertainty due to negative sentiment around oil and gas, because of the ban on licences and the EPL extension. So when is the Secretary of State, when is the Scottish Labour Party going to grow a backbone, stand up to the Secretary of State for Desnes and stand up for Scotland and Scottish workers?
Mr Speaker, I don't know if he agrees with net zero anymore. Certainly his leader doesn't seem to believe it. That's where the jobs are of the future. It is a declining basin in the North Sea. They're making that transition as companies already. We need to be making sure we've got pace in this. That is the big issue. That means we need regulatory change, we need investment. That's what GB Energy is there to do. The National Wealth Fund is making investments as well. We've seen that £600 million investment made in Scottish Power for the infrastructure. Things are starting to happen. We need to make sure we've got cross-party support to get it happening.
Martin Rhodes.
Question number 2, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
The National Wealth Fund has made its first Scottish investment in the Glasgow City region, which is one of 4 areas across the UK selected for strategic partnerships with the National Wealth Fund to unlock private investment opportunities. And the Secretary of State, of course, meets regularly with the Deputy First Minister to discuss economic growth, which is this government's #1 priority.
I thank the Minister for her reply. Would she agree with me that in recent years we have witnessed the benefits of further devolving powers to cities and city regions that has created tailored policies to better serve communities? Yet in Scotland, devolution appears to have stalled at Holyrood, with little appetite to pass powers further down to our cities, towns and communities. Does she agree that the recent Glasgow City region devolution proposal makes a compelling case for further devolution to the Glasgow City region?
Minister.
It does, Mr Speaker. But I'm afraid the SNP seems determined to hoard powers and funding for themselves rather than see them pass to communities. And there's no better example of that, Mr Speaker, than the Labour-run council in South Lanarkshire proposing £8 million for Hamilton Town Centre, only for the SNP to do what? Vote against it. That's why voters in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse should back a real local champion, Labour's Davy Russell, tomorrow.
Rushworth.
Number 3, Mr Speaker.
From bench. Number 3.
With your permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 3 and 12 together. I'd like to start by thanking veterans for their service and their families for the sacrifices which enabled it. And, as it is Volunteers Week, can I also place on record my thanks and that of the whole House to the volunteers who do so much for our military charities. I welcome the announcement of Valour, a new programme giving veterans across the UK easier access to essential care and support. The Minister for Veterans and People is leading work across the UK Government to ensure veterans and their families have sufficient access to health, housing, employment and other forms of support.
I'm Rushworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I regularly speak with veterans in Bishop Auckland, and while they mostly reflect positively on their military service, they do often mention that the need to improve the homes for forces families. So will the Minister welcome this week's announcement that Labour is going to be improving 3,000 forces family homes in Scotland as part of a £1.5 billion investment, and does she agree with me that all those who serve our forces in this United Kingdom should have homes fit for heroes?
Mr Speaker, I am pleased to join my honourable friend in welcoming the Strategic Defence Review, launched by the Prime Minister in Scotland on Monday, which included over £400 million of investment in military accommodation in Scotland. And I'm sure my honourable friend, like me, will be appalled that the First Minister snubbed a confidential briefing on that Strategic Defence Review to go campaigning in the by-election at a charity whose funding he'd already slashed.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A local charity in my area supports women veterans, and recently they were supporting a particular woman who was rehomed in general purpose supported accommodation for veterans in Scotland. A survivor of sexual violence, the accommodation was entirely unsuitable, and it actually led to her being subjected to a further sexual assault by a man who also housed there. Can the Minister assure me that the work that she is doing with the Ministry of Defence to ensure appropriate support for women veterans?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I'm truly sorry to hear about the experiences of my honourable friend's constituent. Support services and accommodation across the UK must reflect the needs of all our veterans, including women. That includes the provision of safe, suitable and appropriate housing. And if my honourable friend writes to me, I'll ask my honourable friend, the Minister for Veterans and People, to be in touch with her.
John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The last Conservative government had a dedicated Minister of State for Veterans. The new Labour government took that, a Minister for State for Veterans sitting around the Cabinet table, but that job was taken away by the new administration. So how are the interests of veterans in Scotland being raised at the Cabinet table under the new government?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Minister for Veterans and People is doing sterling work. His advocacy has helped ensure that Labour will improve 3,000 Forces family homes. We are investing £1.5 billion of investment across the whole UK, and I'm sure he, like me, watched with interest the strategic defence reviews launch in Scotland and then in this chamber, with admiration for what the Minister for Veterans and People is doing for veterans, but also for those who currently serve us with such distinction.
Mr Speaker, Scotland-born veteran Betty Gallagher joined the army when she was 17, but 8 months later she was dishonourably discharged for what was referred to as lesbian tendencies. Today, Betty runs thriving LGBT hub Born Out LGBT in Eastbourne and founded Eastbourne Pride. Will the Minister thank Betty for her service to our country and advise on how she and other veterans can seek justice for the discrimination they were subjected to?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm delighted to join him in thanking Betty for all of her efforts. My honourable friend will know that there has been work undertaken as part of the review into justice for LGBT people in our armed forces, and we are pleased to commend that to the House.
Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks from the honourable gentleman from Aberdeenshire and Kincardine for the success of Aberdeen Football Club. The Strategic Defence Review makes it clear that housing must be a priority and the money from the sale of housing must be reinvested. But continually veterans come to me who've been discharged into homelessness. So can the Minister reassure us that it will be a vital part of making sure that houses which are sold or redeveloped are available to veterans' families?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to offer that reassurance.
We come to Stephen Gafford.
Mr Speaker, and I'll join with colleagues in congratulating Aberdeen FC despite the impact that had on my own beloved Dundee United. But I'd also like to congratulate Arbroath, of course, for securing the Scottish League One championship. The Scottish Government has reinstated the winter fuel payment for up to 88,000 pension-age veterans in Scotland. But the Prime Minister said it was right to slash the winter fuel payment. Was the Prime Minister right to slash it?
Mr Speaker, the member will be perfectly aware, as indeed everyone in the House will be, that questions about the winter fuel payment in Scotland are devolved to the Scottish Government. Decisions made in Scotland are therefore the responsibility of the Scottish Government. But I'm very pleased to reiterate to the House what the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have said, that this was a difficult decision, and now that we have a little more breathing space, we are very pleased to be making changes to help more pensioners.
Stephen Gaffins.
Speaker, well, I see that we're not going to get a straight answer out of the Minister any more than people in Hamilton got a straight answer out of their candidate, and that'll be why they're sinking without trace. So let me put it this way. Does the Minister think that the Prime Minister was right to have slashed the winter fuel payment from up to 1 million veterans across the UK?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, when this government took office, we inherited a £22 billion black hole that required emergency action to deal with. We said at the time it was a difficult decision we did not want to make, and now we're very pleased to be in a position where we can reconsider it.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, Scotland's universities are of course world class, but I'm very concerned about the financial difficulties being faced by several of them. Higher education, as you'll know, is a devolved matter, and Scotland's universities, their staff and their students all need a Scottish Government with a proper plan to turn this crisis around.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. International students are hugely valuable, not just through sharing of cultures and knowledge, but to our universities and the local economies around them. And in North East Fife in 2021-22, this was estimated at £159 million. What discussions has the Minister had with the Scottish Government about the economic impact of the reforms for international students in the Immigration White Paper? And can she update the House if indeed an economic impact assessment has taken place?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, we're in ongoing discussion with the Scottish Government and with Scottish universities, but I want to be absolutely definitive about this because there's been some confusion in the press. Education policy is devolved, and the international student levy will not apply in Scotland unless the Scottish Government decides to introduce it. I met with University Scotland just this week and made this point very clear, and I'm pleased to do so again today.
Mr Speaker, the university sector is important to grow the Scottish economy, but so is tourism too. And can the Secretary of State enlighten me on these jet safari trips taking place from Clacton to Scotland, allowing former bankers to patronise the locals miss the big picture and be back in England in time for a pint of warm beer by lunchtime?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think I did hear something about the member for Clacton getting lost in Hamilton this weekend, skulking behind the bins before he was sent packing by the good people of South Lanarkshire. Of course, the only local candidate in that by-election is Labour's Davy Russell, who stand up for his community against the division peddled by both the SNP and Reform.
Sir Desmond Sway.
Sir.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman will have heard me remind the House on a number of occasions that it was John Swinney himself who said that education was the defining mission of his SNP government. Yet earlier this year we got the news that standards of attainment in Scotland schools are declining across the board, and shamefully outcomes for young working class kids are getting worse. The attainment gap is widening and the Scottish Government has failed a generation. They can't be allowed a third decade in power to continue that damage. Scotland's teachers, parents and pupils all deserve better standards in our schools.
Sir Desmond Sway.
It's caused that the system, which was once the benchmark for all others, to become such a disappointment?
Yes, MP. Yes, there's a very simple answer to that question, Mr Speaker. The SNP Scottish Government.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When my right honourable friend discussed with SNP ministers the huge employment opportunities created for young people in Scotland by this government through announcements made this week, will they impress upon them the urgent need they finally tackle the persistent and in some areas widening attainment gap for people from poorer backgrounds they presided over, not only in Fife but also in South Lanarkshire, where these concerns have often been raised by residents of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse?
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, I don't know if the House will know this, but last year 1,351 pupils left high school in Scotland without a single qualification to their name. 1 in 6 Scots are not in education, employment or training, and that is the legacy of the SNP Scottish Government. And what have they done about jobs and growth? They're against the defence industry, they're against the trade deals with the EU, India and the US, they're against young Scots in Scotland.
Easton.
Question number 6, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, our recent trade deals with the United States, India and the EU will improve access to vital markets for businesses in both Scotland and Northern Ireland. These are deals with the most populous country in the world, the richest country in the world and our most important trading partner. I recognise the importance of economic cooperation between Northern Ireland and Scotland, and indeed earlier this week I met with my honourable friend, the member for South Antrim, and a local business to discuss exactly this.
Susan.
Mr Speaker, would the Minister consider setting up a meeting with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to consider creating a trade fair between Northern Ireland businesses and Scottish businesses? This would create networks, possibly create jobs, and would be great for the economy for both Northern Ireland and Scotland, and would certainly go down well with businesses in North Down, my constituency, and right across the UK.
Mr Speaker, I'd be delighted to see more trade between Scotland and Northern Ireland, and will very happily meet with colleagues in the Northern Ireland office to explore that.
Alan Gamble.
Speaker, Scotland and Northern Ireland set to benefit from this government's trio of trade deals. Does she agree with me it's astonishing the SNP stands with the Tories and Reform against an EU trade deal that's good for Scotland, and that after almost 20 years in government the SNP have no plan for Scotland? 1 in 6 Scots on NHS waiting lists, Ayrshire ferries late and costing £1 billion, 1 in 6 Scots not in education, employment or training, and no plan for the defence of our union.
Mr Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend that it's absolutely astonishing that we see ranged on the benches opposite numerous people who have talked down the potential of Scotland's exporters, who said that there isn't any benefit to be had from these deals, from a Scottish business sector that is desperate to grow, desperate to export, and is delighted with these 3 trade deals that will make such a difference to them.
Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. For years, Scotland's roads have been underinvested in. The A9, A96, A77, A75, all in dire need of upgrading or dualling, all delayed or even cancelled by the SNP. So in the spirit of improving economic cooperation between the nations of the UK, specifically between Scotland and Northern Ireland, given the vital importance to individuals, businesses and hauliers of the A77 and A75, can I ask, is she seeking the consequent Barnett consequentials of this morning's announcement by the Chancellor to be ring-fenced so the SNP must spend this money on improving roads in Scotland?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm delighted to confirm that we're in ongoing conversation with all relevant parties, but yes, we would like to see an increase in trade and the transport infrastructure that supports it.
Lawrence Sullivan.
7, please, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 7 and 9 together. Mr. Speaker, as a former publican, I know these are hard times for businesses on the High Street. We're investing £200 million in our plans for neighbourhoods in Scotland, with £20 million worth of funding for towns including Irvine, Greenock, Kilmarnock, Coatbridge, Clydebank, Elgin, Dumfries, Arbroath, Peterhead and Kirkwall. Of course, it would help if the Scottish Government extended business rates relief to retail and leisure businesses, as is the case south of the border. Many businesses in Scotland are asking where that money went.
Does the Secretary of State agree with me that it was astonishing that the SNP voted against the £8 million to regenerate Hamilton Town Centre, and that only Labour's Davy Russell will stand up for local people, jobs and services?
Mr. Speaker, I've bought glasses to see if I can find an ounce of credibility in the SNP's candidate in Hamilton for voting against that £8 million. The SNP candidate is a councillor from Cambuslang who stood for election twice in Rutherglen, sought selection in Shettleston and then voted against £8 million for the Hamilton Town Centre before seeking selection there. If Scotland were to elect councillors with a single transferable vote, she appears to be the SNP's single transferable candidate.
Speaker, proud industrial heritage, a strong community spirit and an overwhelming feeling of being let down and underinvested in by the previous Conservative government is something which unites towns in my constituency with those across Scotland, including those in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. In Wales, Labour's Transforming Towns programme has invested in Holyrood in my constituency. Will the Secretary of State join me? Will the Secretary of State join me in asking and calling on the SNP to U-turn and to finally back Labour's plans to invest in Hamilton Town Centre?
Mr. Speaker, what a wonderful representative the Honourable Lady is to her constituency, and I couldn't agree with her more. The SNP candidate is yet to explain to voters in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse why she voted against the much-needed £8 million investment in Hamilton Town Centre. I hope she will explain before tomorrow's vote. If she doesn't, everyone should back Labour's Davy Russell.
Stephen Flynn. Can I tell you what's bad for town centres, and that is job losses. On the watch of this government, Robert Gordon's University have been forced to publish a report which outlines that there could be 400 job losses in the North Sea every 2 weeks. That is a Grangemouth type shutdown every 2 weeks. How many jobs have to be lost in my constituency for his government to act?
Mr. Speaker, the leader of the SNP in this House voted against the setting up of GB Energy in his own constituency that are creating jobs in Scotland. He's against the EU trade deal. He's against the US trade deal. He's against the India trade deal. He is bad for jobs and they should go.
Towns and villages across North East Scotland, such as Aberdeen, Inverurie, Kintore, Ellen in my constituency, they are all going to need regeneration in the future if his government keeps decimating the oil and gas sector. The best thing he can do, that his government can do for the North East of Scotland, is to allow new licences and cut their increase to the EPL. Will he commit to doing this? Otherwise, more and more money will need to be put into North East Scotland to regenerate our towns in the future.
Mr. Speaker, it's this government that's putting money into Scottish towns to regenerate them. And as we keep saying from this dispatch box on a number of occasions, oil and gas will be with us for decades to come, but the industry itself is making the transition. We have to make sure that transition happens, and it happens for the benefit of workers in North East of Scotland and all over Scotland. But it's a transition, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not even sure the Honourable Lady or the party opposite actually now back.
Annalise Midgley.
Question number 8, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, following the spring statement, it was confirmed that the block grant for Scotland this year was a record £50 billion. No thanks to the SNP and Reform, Mr. Speaker, who both voted against this massive funding boost for Scotland and who scrapped the Barnett formula that it delivered it. Despite that record funding, the SNP still have no plan to get waiting lists down, with 1 in 6 Scots still stuck on NHS waiting lists and educational attainment gap growing by the day.
Annalise Midgley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the record funding provided by the Labour government, the SNP plan to downgrade the neonatal intensive care unit at Wishaw General, which could force the families of sick babies to travel as far as Aberdeen for treatment and support. Does he agree with me that the SNP cut should be reversed?
Mr. Mr. Speaker. As the father of an 18-week-old daughter, I'm absolutely horrified by these proposals, and I know it will be causing anxiety for families across Lanarkshire. That's why it's so disappointing to see the SNP candidate in the Hamilton by-election back these plans to downgrade the Wishaw neonatal unit. The way to send a message to the SNP that this is unacceptable is to vote for Davy Russell tomorrow in the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor's autumn budget delivered the biggest settlement in the history of devolution for the Scottish Government. 50 billion. I want to see that cash reach the frontline services which have suffered years of cuts under the SNP. And that record settlement is only possible because of the Barnett formula, something opposed not only by the Scottish Nationalists, but also the member for Clacton, whose reform circus was sent packing from Hamilton this week.
David Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the largest ever devolution settlement of $50 billion is great news for Scotland and its local authorities. But under the SNP, there are 840,000 cases on NHS waiting lists. This affects people in my constituency in North Northumberland, many of whom use cross-border healthcare and dental services. So, does the Minister agree with me that the SNP needs to sort itself out and start delivering change to the NHS as Labour is in England?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I could not agree more. In England, waiting lists have fallen since Labour came to office less than a year ago, while in Scotland they continue to rise, and now we see nearly 1 in 6 Scots waiting for treatment. John Swinney has, in total desperation, announced this SNP government's 5th recovery NHS plan in less than 4 years. But the reality is patients, staff and we all know Scotland desperately needs a new direction.